Hi, my name is Susan Turnbull, and I illustrated The Raccoon and the Bee Tree.
When you first read the story, what were your thoughts?
I loved the story. It was full of action and surprises. There were all kinds of funny things that happened to this little raccoon on his adventure, and I just thought it would really be a fun story to illustrate.
What gave you the inspiration for the raccoon in the illustration?
I think that his spunkiness, and he was so full of himself, and he just didn't pay attention to anybody else but himself, and so I enjoyed that part of his personality, picked right up on that. And then there were a couple of scenes that stuck with me as I read it. How he could be so full of himself that he wouldn't even notice jumping on a family of skunks, for example. And then the other example was that he's in the tree blissfully eating honey, and the world is great, and all of a sudden he gets this terrible sting, and again takes him by surprise because he's so full of himself that he didn't notice the bees at all. And so then he has to learn some lessons, and he runs through the night, and I could just see this little guy in my mind as I read the story. He was full of great emotion and great expression, and I love the way the story ends, where I think he has learned his lesson. He jumped into the lake, and he looks so peaceful and happy after he's washed all those leaves off. And it just reminded me of a lot of little kids, and even myself, when we don't pay attention, and we get wrapped up in ourselves. And so I guess the inspiration was having felt like that myself as well as a child, and gotten in trouble for things that I wasn't paying attention to, and not looking around to see what the answers were earlier. So that's probably what inspired me, was his little selfish self, and then his surprise at all of those things that happened to him. I enjoyed that part.
The raccoon seems to have a definite personality. Where does that come from?
Well, there's a lot of me in that little raccoon. I had to imagine each of those scenes and how I would feel, and that really helped me give a lot of expression and emotion to those drawings.
What techniques did you use to produce the illustrations?
I use pencil and pastel, and a few pastel pencils on paper. And I use layers and layers of pastel to kind of build up all the different colors and so on. And then when I get it to a certain point that's almost finished, I like to scan them in and finish them in the computer. That gives me better control over the highlights and some small details that I can't get at with the pencils as easily. So I've been working with the computer and finishing my art in the computer for quite a few years now, and I really like that.
Where did you learn these techniques, or develop these techniques that you use?
Well, I started drawing when I was very little. I used to like to draw out of the Sunday comics. And in those days, all I had was a pencil and paper, so I learned to be very good at drawing and copying things. And then I started using my imagination and developing some of my own original characters, even when I was a little kid. And that was one of the favorite parts that I did. Then I learned from Beulah Donnell, a lady in Hot Springs that used to give art lessons, and she when I was about 9, I got to go there and learn how to use pastels and paint and other things too. And that really helped, gave me some good tips that I then went out and practiced and practiced and drew and drew. And I think that's really the coolest thing to do. As I looked at other artists' work and looked in books and watched how everybody was doing their art, and then that gave me more ideas to create my own style. And then later on, I went to art school in Chicago, and again, I learned a few more things there, and I guess this whole combination has helped create several different styles that I like to use for illustrating. And the most fun part of all of this recently has been using the computer. I use it in my work all the time as a graphic designer and illustrator, and it really opens up even more doors to making your art better and more original and fun. So the computer was a big part recently in the to make these illustrations.
What is your favorite illustration or spread in the book, and why?
Well, I have several. It's really hard for me to choose. So I'll just tell you about my 3 favorite ones. The first one is when he gets stung and he has no idea what happened to him because he was blissfully eating honey right before then, not paying attention, didn't even notice those bees. And so I love when he just shoots right up off the branch, and the little ladybug flies away and all the bees are chasing him, and so that's one of my favorite parts. The other 2 scenes I really like are the ones with the skunks, where the little raccoon is blissfully hopping along and he lands on this family of skunks and they have no idea what happened, and the little mouse is laughing hysterically, and it's just really one of my favorite scenes. And then the next scene right after that is where the little raccoon is trying to talk his way out of what he just did, and the father skunk is really mad, and little mommy skunk is really mad, and all the little skunks are lined up behind her, and they're just really disgusted with that rude raccoon.
There are several little bugs and animals that make regular appearances throughout the book, but are not in the main story. What led you to invent these additions, and what do they mean or represent?
Well, when I was a little child, I used to sit in the forest and sometimes be very quiet, and I would begin to notice the bugs and the butterflies and the squirrels and the rabbits and all these little animals that sort of lived in this forest as well. And so I wanted to put in these little secondary creatures that seemed to follow the raccoon as he was merely going on his way, and then later on with all of his crazy disasters, so that they could react. They have these reactions to what happens in the story as well, and he's affecting their lives too. And they're interested in him as well. They like this little raccoon, really, so they're, especially that little mouse. That little mouse is following him around, and he's laughing at him, and he's trying to warn him about the bees, and and he goes right to the end with his little friend, and even takes a little nap at the end of the book with him. But I think they could represent also children that are reading the story. The children might identify with the secret little bug or the little mouse or the squirrel that's in the story, and they could maybe put themselves in the place of those little secondary animals, and then become part of the story as well. So even when I drew the little rabbit, she reminds me of my little granddaughter Hannah. And so it's really fun to kind of become that little animal and hop through the story and appear at different pages. And I like to have the kids have something to look for and find besides just what the raccoon's doing, because everything he's doing is affecting the whole forest and everybody that's in it. Just like in our lives, the things that we do and say affect other people. And so I wanted to kind of show that with these little whimsical animals throughout the story.